Hiya, right, welcome to today's art lesson. Today we're going to be learning how to paint with coffee. I thought it would be fun for us to step away from our pens and pencils for today's art lesson. I know not all of us would have had access to paints at home, so instead we're going to be painting with coffee. So by the end of today's art lesson, we should all have learned how to paint with coffee by experimenting with different tools, coffee strengths and mark making techniques. We will then put these new skills into practice to create a portrait of our favourite character from the film The Greatest Showman. Now this lesson includes 2 tasks, and I'd like you to watch the video the whole way through first and then do both tasks. You can always come back to the video when you're setting up for each task to help guide you through the process. But why coffee, miss? It might seem a bit random to be basing a lesson on painting with coffee. So to start us off, I just want you to think about this question. Why coffee? Before the next slide, I want you to come up with a few benefits that could come from choosing to paint with coffee. So have a think about that now. There are lots of factors that could be considered as advantages when painting with coffee. Firstly, it's accessible. We should all have access to coffee, and if not coffee, then tea, which you could also use. This already makes it a great substitute for paints, as you should all be able to paint using just the things from around your kitchen. When we choose to paint with coffee, we get a monochromatic outcome. And all monochromatic means is that it includes just one colour. Coffee produces a sepia sort of ranges of colour, and they can be compared to Renaissance paintings like those of Leonardo da Vinci. So we should get a really nice outcome from this. And also, when you're painting with coffee, it has a similar characteristics to those of watercolour paints. This means we're still able to develop our painting skills from home. Here are just a few examples of coffee paintings to show you what sort of outcomes can be produced from working with using coffee as a medium of painting. We are not limited to one outcome, and the more we develop our skills, we will be able to create a range of tones and textures. We'll be able to use different markings to produce textures we desire within our paintings. And we will also be using different strengths of coffee solutions to develop the tones in our paintings. These are all key elements that we are going to be practicing today. No paintbrush? No problem. For all of my demonstration videos in today's lesson, I haven't used a paintbrush once. So this is the fun part of the lesson, where I'm going to ask you to find paintbrush alternatives. This is part of task 1. I'm going to ask you to go on a mini scavenger hunt around your house to find painting tools. So places you can find objects which you can use as painting tools could include your kitchen, your bedroom, your bathroom or even your garden. And you can pick any sort of object. When you are deciding which objects to use as your painting tools, I recommend you consider the texture of the object and how it's going to transfer the coffee onto the paper. As I've mentioned, we are going to be using coffee as the paint today. So to make our coffee solutions, I recommend you mix up a light and a medium solution. Use 2 cups, put 1 teaspoon of coffee in the first cup and 2 teaspoons of coffee in the second cup, and then add a splash of water to each cup. You can always add more water later, but at this stage it's important to not over dilute the solutions. We still want the coffee strong enough to make colour impact on the paper. I also recommend that you keep a mixing palette close by. Now this can be a plate or lid of a Tupperware or anything you've got handy which you can just wipe clean afterwards. And to use this as a mixing palette, we're going to use it to make the dark solution. So first tip out the coffee granules onto the surface, and then to mix it together, you're going to wet your chosen tool and then mix it into a paste. And this should create a paste-like consistency, so again not too much water. And you can see an example of this in my demonstration video on the next slide. So the things I've managed to find around my house include cotton wool buds, I've got some tissue paper, a sponge, a scourer, a toothbrush, a fork, which is also a knife, a skewer, and a Nerf bullet. Now I've chosen these for the range of textures and printmaking techniques that I'm going to be able to try out with them. Now I start off by mixing my coffee onto the palette. This is going to make sure that I get the darkest form of coffee. It's also going to make it a bit easier for me to dip my objects into rather than using a cup. So I start off by tipping the coffee out onto the little lid I found and just wetting a cotton wool bud and mixing it with water to create this paste-like consistency. Now this is going to make it dark enough for my experimental page which we are starting. So I start off by using the Nerf bullet and just creating a little dabbing effect. I'm experimenting with how much coffee I've got on the Nerf bullet and how much water I'm using as well. And just seeing the range of techniques this gives me. When I move on to the paintbrush, I do a similar sort of thing, but I'm just experimenting with the different ways I can use the tools. So obviously I needed a bit more water for this to get onto all of the bristles. The mark making technique I've applied here, first I dabbed it but then I realised I didn't like it, so I started flicking it. And this is the point of this experimental task. I want you to explore the chosen objects you've used and start using them as tools. Experiment with them. The different marks you can make, the different techniques that you need to use them. This is going to help you in the second task for today as well. So throughout the video, I want you to pay attention to the different techniques I use to each of the objects and the different marks that they leave as well. Let's break this task down. After you watch the whole video, come back to this slide as it's going to help you remember all the parts you need for the task. I want you to spend around 15 minutes preparing. The first 10 minutes is going to be that scavenger hunt to gather up all the tools. So spend the time going around your house and picking things that you want to experiment with. Then spend 5 minutes mixing up the coffee. Create a light and a medium solution and also keep that mixing palette close by to mix up more. You'll also need a glass of clean water to help clean your tools as you go along. Also a bit of tissue paper to help dab excess water off when needed. And then for the first task, I want you to spend just 15 minutes doing your experimental mark making. So what I found helpful was to mark out the area on the paper first, and this is just going to help you keep track of what technique you're using with which tool. Try using every tool using different mark making techniques, whether that's dabbing, flicking, using it to draw. Just be completely experimental and see what works and what doesn't. There's no rules for this task, just have fun with it. Here's some top tips to help you with the first task today. First off, don't make your paper too wet. This will crinkle up the paper. And ways you can avoid this is by using not too much water. So like I said, keep some tissue paper close by and just dab off any excess water before you put the tool onto the paper. And another thing you can try is waiting for the paper to dry before adding more on. This can create a different effect as well to the way the paint looks at the end. So this could be interesting to test out. Secondly, try to keep track of which tools and techniques you've been used. Now you can do this by adding little notes underneath the boxes you're going to test them out on. This will help you on the second task when you need to try out different techniques for that. And lastly, be experimental. Try all the tools you have in different ways and try different amounts of coffees to see what colours they produce. So for this task you will need 2 or 3 pieces of card or paper, a range of painting tools, so these are the objects you're going to collect from around your house, and 3 coffee solutions. They are the light, medium and dark, a clean glass of water and some tissue paper. For task 2, I want us to take our best experimental techniques from task 1 and practice them to help us create a painted portrait of our favourite character from The Greatest Showman. I've included these images as resources on Teams, so please head back to Teams, pick your favourite character and use that image to influence your painting for task 2. We can break today's second task down into 3 steps. So first you're going to pick the character. You can do that using the previous slide or the images on Teams under today's assignment. Then you're going to outline their main features. You can just use a pencil for this, just to help you colour in. For the last stage, we're going to add the colour using the coffee solutions and the tools you've picked. So consider the tones and the textures for this task. And we're going to pick our favourite tools from the last task to help us do this. So as you can see from my example video there, I'm using a mixture of a cotton wool bed, a toothbrush and the corn and the cob skewer. And I've used these in a selection of ways through dabbing. I've used the tissue paper as well. I've also included a mixture of coffee solutions to get those tonal ranges in my painting. And these are all things I want you to experiment with in your drawings and paintings as well. I want you to spend around 40 minutes on this task, so do as much as you can within that time. And just experiment and create those 2 main features, the tones and the textures. As ever guys, use this slide to help you set goals for today's task. Use it as a checklist, as these are the key things I'm going to be looking for during marking your work. So to make sure your work for task 1 is successful, make sure you use a wide range of objects with varied strength of coffee mixtures to create experimental mark making sheet that shows a range of tones and textures. Then carry out the best of these experiments in your work for task 2 to create a portrait of your favourite character that includes tones and textures. I'd like us to end today's lesson with some reflective sentences, and they are an important part of the lesson, so I'd like to see some images of your written answers, please. So first off, I want you to show me how you've managed to reach the success criteria. Then tell me 3 things you've learned from today's lesson, and also how you can improve on your tasks. When you are done, please upload 3 images. Now those 3 images need to include your experimental mark making from the first task, your character portrait from the second task, and then lastly your reflective written answers from this slide. If you upload all three of these things, you can have a golden star. So just be experimental with today's lesson and just have fun with it, guys. Good luck.